So 2-5 is the game. We're playing in TCH Dallas, so tons of action. I have 1,735 as the effective stack, and there are 7 people at the table. I'd been moved to this table recently from another 2-5 one,
Okay.
and yeah, it's relatively new. Maybe been here for about 30, 45 minutes. So I'm in the big blind, and I have Queen nine clubs, both clubs.
Just a little bit of background on TCH. Dallas is just crazy, crazy busy. And of course, a Texas 2-5 game plays like a 10-20 game because it's match the stack, right?
Yeah, it is. It is certainly very large stacks. I was covered multiple times. I think 2 or 3 people at that table definitely had more than 2,000.
Okay.
And a straddle is pretty often. In this game, it wasn't a contract straddle, but in this particular hand, there was a straddle.
And you're in the big blind here with Queen nine of clubs.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Perfect. So the straddle is, under the gun makes it $10, and then there's 2 callers, and then the button raises to 90. So I had only been at this table a short period of time, but both other hands that I had seen this button player, they raised, and those hands never kind of went to showdown. So I didn't see what he had, but he kind of stayed aggressive after the flop and took those hands down. So I had no clue what this villain had, but I know that he had raised both times before, and so I end up making a call here pre-flop with the big blind, and then everyone else folds.
So you call, you're not closing the action. Of course, the straddle is to your left, and there's 2 limps. I mean, this is, it's one of these spots where in a straddle pot, you're not, one of the things that I took away from Hustler Casino Live, and especially Durr and Garrett, is that when they were playing deep, they were playing a lot of hands in position. They didn't actually have problems like raise calling with like 5-6 offsuit, suited kings, things like that. But they were 1,000 big blinds deep. Here, because it's a straddle pot, so it's 2-5-10 and you're 17-35, and you're going to be out of position. If you do really want to play well pre-flop from the middle blind, this is probably going to be a 3-bet or fold. What I see happen, and you might call it a little bit nitty, but I got to be honest with you, a lot of times that straddle is going to complete, and at least one of the limpers is going to call, and then you're just it's just a negative EV spot. Now, with that being said, like I said, if I were trying to up my VPIP for a live stream game, I might play this. But if I was trying to really, really play well pre-flop, most likely this is just going to be a fold. But you call in big blind, and everyone else folds, right? So heads up.
And that was a little bit of a surprise, just because I thought usually the limpers will stick around. They're kind of sticky in Texas, but certainly it becomes heads up now, and I'm out of position as the big blind.
You actually don't want the limpers in, because it's just going to be easier for you to realize with this particular hand. That's the thing. Maybe like if you had a suited ace, maybe maybe a little bit different, but non sort of nut suited hands that are small suited connectors, hands like this, they just, almost every single hand benefits from being more short-handed. The ones obviously that jump out that don't benefit from that would be like a pair of 4s, a pair of 5s, something like that. But okay, so we'll go to the flop here, 205.
Yep, so the flop comes out 9 of diamonds, 3 of clubs, 2 of spades.
Okay.
And, initially, I would say, I don't play too much, but when I play in Texas, I tend to kind of let aggressors a bet. So I check here. My thought process was, he doesn't really, I don't think he has any clue what I'd be on. And so I thought this was a pretty good flop for me. And I'd rather he kind of takes a stab with whatever range of hands he might have. So I check, and he makes it 120. And then I just call that.
I mean, that's very, very standard to check. Heads up, button bets, 120. I mean, where you might, and I'm assuming you call, right? Where you might start to have a leading range is multi-way in a given scenario. I actually saw Garrett do that over the weekend too with Queen Jack, and he took Matt Berkey to a little bit of value town against Queen 10 on a Queen high board. But it's a fairly standard, I would say, check to the pre-flop raiser. With that being said, though, and where people don't necessarily play this a ton, I would say, in live poker, although you will see some people who kind of don't know what they're doing do it by accident, you actually might have some check raises here with just a 9 and a backdoor club draw, just for a little bit of protection. The call, I would say, is more standard. I mean, that's what I would probably expect to see. So 120 plus 120 is 240. So now it's probably what, 445 to the turn?
Yeah, that's what I have.
Okay.
And so the turn comes a jack of spades, which is a little bit of an interesting card. I kind of treated it as a blank. So in my mind, he could have a very random hand like a jack 10 suited or maybe ace jack if he's playing like a normal range. I didn't quite think that this card hit him at all. And so I decided actually in this case to lead out. What I was most worried about was and I let out for 225. So I go ahead and bet 225. And I was kind of worried about a backdoor ace hand. Like, let's just say if he plays ace five suited, which totally makes sense to raise on the button with. I just didn't want an ace getting there. I thought there were draws that were still out there, and I kind of wanted to charge him. The jack of spades also brings out a backdoor flush. I didn't really think about him having that hand, but I make it 225, and surprisingly, this is the only decision in the hand where I think the villain like sat for a minute. I don't know if that's a tell or anything at all. I don't read too much into it, but he tanks and then he makes a call. 225 from him, and so I have 897 now in the pot.
Yeah, so I'm going to put down 895. So a couple things about this. Where I see usually a reflection of the blind leading the turn, okay? And I actually did a podcast on this a while back. I think it was, I don't remember off the top of my head what it was called, but I'll try to find it for the notes for the CLP subs. I think it was something to do with the blind. I think single raise pots versus big blind or the art of the big blind or something like that. But kind of examine these spots where the out of position player gets to lead. Where I saw it mostly reflected in the computer work was when a lot of two pair and straights come in from the out of position player. You aren't, but this is different though because you're not supposed to be that wide in the spot pre. So all that theory shit goes out the window. Like you can play all that stuff when you're closing the action and maybe like the guy opened to like 4x and you've got like a 40 or 50% completing sort of range here. So that's where people just don't, I think they take some of the theory stuff too far where they realize that the theory stuff is already out the window based upon pre-flop and they're like, I get to lead this card. Well, really? You don't have 40 or 50% of the hands because you weren't completing the action. I mean, you really shouldn't have queen nine of clubs here either. With that being said, I don't even know if this card gets to really be led. It completes jack nine, but you're not going to have pocket jacks and it doesn't really complete a ton of straights. It would be more of like a leading, like if the board had come out like 4, 5, 9, and then the turn was like an 8, or something like that. Also, too, like your sizing is huge for protection here. I mean, you never want to get into a situation where when you're called here, you're probably beat. This is like one of these spots where it's like, oh, I bet 225, and then when I was called here, I went, oh shit. Now, I know you didn't say that, but I've heard that a lot in private lessons and stuff. So if that happens, where you make a bet for value, or in this case for protection, and then somebody calls and you're like, oh, I must be beat now, you've done something wrong. So unless you were starting a bluff here, and this hand's probably too far up to really start to bluff with, I think that the sizing is way too large here, for protection.
The half pot bet, are you thinking like a third is better? I guess I'm just like, I wanted to make sure a draw maybe, you want to punish a draw that makes sense, but if he had a random hand like pocket threes, I guess I thought he could just check raise a huge amount of the time if I bet too small.
You mean raise the turn, you mean, in position?
Yeah, like if I made it like, let's say like 130 and then he just makes it like 480 or something. Like I have no clue where I'd be in the hand. That's kind of why I was like, oh, if he raises my 225, I was just like, okay, I can just fold here. Like there's just
but you don't want to be betting to know where you're at in the hand. That's not really a thing. And again, like on this high blank, I don't think that you should be leading this card all that much. So okay. I probably just wouldn't lead this card at all. For the most part, it's a disconnected high card that probably is in his range more than yours if you're calling with some hands. So, but the sizing on a lead out of the blind probably sometimes is on the larger side, but that's because you have such the turn card in the theory gives you such an advantage. On this card, it doesn't. So it's a little bit contrived, but so he makes the call on the pot to 895. So really, the only thing you're ahead of is somehow if you picked up backdoor spades here, right?
Yeah, nope. And now the river comes, and it's a 6 of hearts. So this is like a pretty big blank. I mean, the spade draw doesn't finish. I doubt 4 or 5 is showing up here very often. So, it was interesting. At this point, I guess the pot, is about 900 or 895. And I think I have about 1,300 left in my stack, 1,350, and I check because I'm pretty happy just showing this down, and villain bets out for 400, and so this is kind of maybe the mistake, or where I'm trying to think through it better, is I end up check raising here, so I end up making it not a jam. I just do 950. And I have my reason for that too, if we want to cover that. And so yeah, so villain bets 400.
Okay,
I raise to 950.
Okay, let's stop here. So hero raises to 950. Are you a CLP subscriber? I can't remember.
I am not. I probably should be.
So yes, because you would learn this, the art of check raising, which is check raising the river, which is a podcast episode here too. So here's the thing. So you want to take hands to check raise the river with that usually have some showdown value. And the reason why you want to do that is because if you do that, sometimes the pot will go check, check. So the idea here is not necessarily a bad one, in the sense that if you check and it gets checked behind, you're going to win sometimes. Whereas like if you had absolutely no showdown value, you wouldn't be like, oh, I'm going to check raise the river here, because if you don't get the bet, you lose. It goes check, check. So there's that. But with that being said, though, after the button bets 400, I mean, first of all, you're sizing, like if you had 1,300 left, I mean, so you could jam for 13, but if I was the villain in this spot on the button and I had an overpair, I don't think I would ever fold. I mean, check raises on the river as bluffs are pretty, I would say, they're pretty rare, but you would have to, in order for you to have what you were representing here, and I'm going to throw out 4-5 suited, because you called in the middle and you really shouldn't have that. So what you're saying here by check raising the river, if all in, okay, we'll get to your sizing in a second, is I have better than one pair here for value, and I played it as a check call lead on the turn, like either jack 9, 9s, deuces, or 3s. I played it as a check call lead on the turn, and then I'm going to check jam the river. That line is so few and far between that I would have a hard time ever folding any value hand that I played this way on the button. And when you only make it 950, I mean, I'm snap calling there all day. So if you don't have the fold equity on the check raise because you've taken such a bizarre line, I think there's higher EV in calling here. Now, you might want to make a case that you could fold, but I certainly think the EV here is higher than calling than to check raise, and especially to 950.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I was considering a jam. I wasn't sure it would get anything more. Like, the only reason I do 950, and this is maybe specific to what I've noticed from the player pool in 2-5 Texas games, is that it seems like people who raise river like a min raise are just always super, super strong. And I mean, maybe that's not a good reason, but I kind of thought, like, I thought he was actually a little bit weak. Like, my thought process was like, since the 6 of hearts was kind of a brick, I kind of assumed that, he might just be betting out to scare off a one pair hand. And so I thought, I could like theoretically, if he folds this check raise, which he didn't, then he wouldn't know what I have in this hand, right? Which I don't know. Wait a minute.
You just said that he might be betting to fold out like a one pair hand. So that would mean that he's betting as a bluff, right? Well, do you have a hand that's good enough to catch against a bluff here?
I mean, yeah, certainly I do, right?
Then why would you
top pair?
Well, at the end, why do you need to raise a bluff catcher here?
No, I think that was the mistake. Is like I'm not sure if it was. It probably seems a lot better to just call a lot of the times here. I guess maybe the question I have is, like, if I am going to check raise, which it seems like this is not a good spot, the 950 I think was a mistake, right? I'd have to just jam here to have any chance of it being like a good play.
Well, I think that you're going to have to jam to have any chance of better folding. That's for sure. That's why the sizing makes no sense, because okay, you're gonna get him to fold out his bluffs. If you had absolutely no showdown value, the sizing maybe it wouldn't necessarily be the best sizing, but at least it would make some sense. You're risking whatever 950 to win 1,300 because you can't call. But here you can call and win. So if you're gonna check raise to a sizing where the only thing you're gonna get to fold out is bluffs, do you see why with your hand calling would be better than that? Because you beat the bluffs.
Yeah, if he has a bluff, I can just call and I'll win, right? So
yeah. So what ended up happening?
Yeah, so he calls. I turn over my hand Queen 9, and he flips over King 9 of hearts, which was a little bit. I needed to walk away from the table because I was like surprised. I guess. I mean, it was a good hand, and I just didn't expect it that he had King 9 heart.
Well, I got to tell you, it doesn't really surprise me all that much, though, because I think that if I had king nine here and I played it this way, and I would play it up to this way, let's say that I was the villain, it's the same thing as having an overpair. And it might even be better. I could even make a case here that king nine might even be better than queen queen. And the reason why is just because I block some of your value. Because you are representing two pair plus, and the two pair plus is jack nine and sets of nines, threes, and deuces. If I have king nine, you have less jack nine and less pocket nines. You are representing better than one pair. I might rather have king nine here than queens, kings, and aces even sometimes too with what you're representing. And I absolutely would call 450, 100%. I mean, it's the same hand, right? I mean, I hope you go along with my thought, but I don't know why you're shocked for him to turn over king nine as opposed to what, pocket kings?
No, I mean, I guess what, like, in my mind, the problem is when I get to the river here, like, I just never considered a fold, right? The villain bets out 400, and it may be, like, just in my thought process, I was like, this is exactly the type of hand I wanted, where I flop a good pair against the guy who seems to be raising on the button a lot of the times. And I just sat there and like I think a call definitely makes a ton of sense to me. I just when I went this line of like raising, I kind of I don't know, maybe it's just me. I guess if I had the king nine on the other hand, I would just kind of be throwing up a little bit seeing this. But I mean, obviously he made the call and it was the right choice.
Well, I mean, it's certainly a little bit of a thin value bet for sure. I mean, your head's up, so I think you might have a jack here. Like if you floated with jack 10 and then led the turn. I try to be super thin with my value bet, so this is a really thin one by your opponent. I don't know if I'm always betting king nine here as played because of the jack, and you might have jack X, but I'm certainly calling the min check raise. I appreciate the call. Thank you very much. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, and check out the coupon code in the description to try out the Crush Live Poker training site for free.